Hi, this is Jonas from JJ Bell Carpentry. I'm back on the job today finishing off this plywood wall sheeting. So I thought I'd go through my techniques and show you my methods and hopefully give you a few tips and pointers on how to get a nice tidy job with this quite expensive product. It's marine ply, it's about $80 Australian a sheet. And I've also got this custom spotted gum ply, which is about $300 a sheet. So we've got to make sure it all looks good and tidy. Alright, so this is the tools I'm going to use for cutting the ply. I've got the XGT track saw, and I've also got a vacuum attached to that. It's got a Bluetooth system. So that's pretty handy. Cutting inside, if I didn't have the vacuum attached, I'd really need to be wearing a dust mask just because of all the dust. So I've also got the 3 meter track, a 1400 track, and then a couple shorter bits. This bit is quite handy. It's got a track square attached to it, so that's really helpful for making some square cuts, and also I use it for marking stuff out. I've got another square there. I'm nailing it to the wall with 16 gauge bratter, and I've got a few other saws here for doing the cutouts with. I've also got this ply lifting tool, which is quite handy. When I am gluing, I'm not gluing everywhere, but when I am gluing, I'm just using stud adhesive. Also got the level, so whenever I'm starting a new run on a wall, I make sure the first sheet is plumb. And I've got a straight edge as well, which I'm using to mark my nail holes with. I've just got marks every 400 millimeters on it. So that's the tools I'm using. You know, the track saw is an expensive setup, so if I didn't have the track saw, I would be just using a straight edge. I'd be clamping that to my ply and using a circular saw to make the cuts. I'm in the kitchen here. I'm going to sheet these walls today, but before I sheet them, I thought I'd just show you what's inside the walls. As you can see, we've got plumbing pipes everywhere. The hot water service is through there. There's lines going to the sink and the bathroom over there. When you've got pipes like this in a wall, you really have to be extremely careful about where we put the nails, and you also highly recommend just getting my phone out and taking a whole bunch of photos before I start work, just so I can remember and I've got a reference in the future to go back to. I've also, because there's so many pipes here, I've put a row of noggins in to attach my cabinetry to, because I really want to know I can nail into something or screw the cabinets into something here and I'm not going to hit any pipes. The other thing I'm going to do before I start sheeting any of the walls is just mark where my studs are, because you know, as soon as you put the wall sheet on here, everything you see is just going to disappear. So I really need to take some time before I put the wall sheets on to just make sure I'm covered. So I've got 2 power points here that I need to cut out. So what I'm going to do is use a scrap of wood and just do a drawing. So I'll measure off off the sheet, I'm going to measure to the screw holes where the power point attaches. So I'll go 175 to 265. I'll do the same here. So it's going to be the same. Now I'll just measure up. So 485 to 540. Up here. 1025. To 1080. So now I'll just figure out which corner that is on my sheet, and then I can transfer these marks over to the sheet. Okay, so I've got my measurements here, so I'll come up to 485, and I go across 175. So I've got tiles here, but above that there's going to be cover strips, so I need to make sure I nail very close where my joins are so the nails disappear behind the cover strips. Now, to get my middle marks, I've got some marks on my straight edge. I put that at the bottom of the stud, line that up with the top of the stud. Now I just very lightly transfer my marks like this. I'll do that on the next stud. And when I nail them, I turn the nailer sideways so that my nail holes go with the grain, so they'll disappear a little bit better. Alright, so I've got another couple PowerPoint holes here. As you can see, I've drawn my plan again, and I've marked the bottom, and all my measurements have come from this side and the bottom. So I've marked my bottom there, bottom corner, then pulled all my measurements from this side and the bottom, the same up here. So that's a good way to try and make sure you get them quite accurate. You know, if you're not 100% sure, go back and re-measure after you do this. Go back to the wall, re-measure. Another thing I'm keeping in mind is I know my cutouts are 90 mils wide, so if my measurements are not 90 mils, you know, there's obviously something wrong. I'm going to put this sheet of ply in. I've done the cutouts for the PowerPoints, but this is a spot where I am definitely going to use glue, so I'm just going to put some stud adhesive right where my pipes are. So this part of the ply will just be glued. I'll nail at the bottom and then I'll nail up where this nog line is, and I mark that on my datum stick so I know that I'm not going to put any nails here at all. I've also got this 5mm packer at the bottom which the ply is going to sit on top of, and my sheet, I've cut it to be flush with the top of these sheets, just so when I put my cover strip on, it just is continuous around the corner. So this is right behind the sink here, and my cabinets will go in here, and above the cabinets there's going to be a tiled splash pad. Now you might be thinking that plywood is not a good material to put behind cabinets and in a wet area like this, and I agree, but I did check with my tiler before starting the kitchens just to make sure that he was happy with tiling to marine ply, and he's just going to put a primer on, a P9 primer. But we're also going to go to another level of putting a waterproofing membrane behind the cabinets, behind the stove and the sink. And again, these ply sheets have been sealed on the back, and it is marine ply, so I feel comfortable doing this. If you don't want to go to the extent of the waterproofing membrane, you might want to consider something like Villa board behind your kitchen cabinets instead of plywood. Alright, so I've got my spotted gum feature ply here ready to go on, but of course the spotted gum ply is 8mm, whereas the marine ply is 12mm. So to make up that 4mm difference, I've got some 4mm ply and I've just packed out all the studs just to flush it out. The other thing I'm doing to get my expansion gap is to just put some ply on the floor, so I've got a 5mm gap at the bottom, and then yeah, I can just pull that out afterwards and there'll be a expansion gap there. Let's see if it fits. So of course it doesn't fit, so I'm just going to put a little mark here and then I'll know how much more I need to take off at the bottom. It's good at the top, so I'll leave that and I'll just do a little second trim along this edge to get it in. See, when I remove the ply, I know exactly how much I need to trim off. I'm just measuring for this last piece of spotted gum ply. Now I've got that angle on top, so to get that angle, first I've got my 5mm packer at the bottom, and then I'm measuring off that. I'll get the long point, and then I'll come over here and get the short point. And then I'll just transfer those two measurements onto my sheet of ply, and that will give me a pretty exact fit. I could also work out the angle, but I find just measuring the short point and the long point's a bit of a safer option. So I've transferred my short point and my long point onto this sheet of ply. I've double checked my measurements because this is a money cut. But to determine if I'm cutting the short point the right way, I'm just going to use my arms and measure this. This is the bottom corner of the short point, so I can come up, spin around, make sure my short point is the short point, because it's really easy to just cut it backwards or make a mistake with these sort of cuts, particularly when it's not directly facing where you want it to go. Alright, so using that scribe cut, I've got a perfect cut at the top, and even though it's going to be covered, it's still nice to do that. So I'm set up on the floor like this just because it makes my life a bit easier. I'm working by myself, so I'm lifting these big heavy sheets, and to put them up on sawhorses is a bit hard by myself, so I'm just laying them down on the floor. If I had a second person helping me, I'd be cutting up on sawhorses with a couple rails just to sit the ply on. The other thing I'm doing with these expensive sheets of ply is using the scoring function on my track saw to do a score cut, and then I'll do a second pass to cut it completely. And I've also just got some scraps of sandpaper, so when I need to take the rough edges off with the sandpaper before I install the plywood. Just helps to, when I go to put the trim pieces on, it's just going to help it all to sit flatter. Alright, ready to do a test fit. Looks great. Got a bit of a gap here, and it's tight at the bottom. It's just because the wall's a bit out of plumb. But I'm just going to pull this edge tight because that's where my cover strip's going to go. There's also going to be a corner bead in here, so all those gaps will be covered up. Another tip here, I've been using my straight edge to mark the studs in the middle of the sheet, but here it's not going to fit, it's a little bit too long. So what I can actually do is use my tape measure as a straight edge. So I'll put on my mark at the bottom, send it to my mark at the top, and then I have a plumb line, and I can just mark my 400 spacing for my nails with just using the tape measure. I was thinking about going out to the car and getting the laser, but just for a single line, wasn't really worth it. But when I come to put the cover strips on, I will definitely get the laser out and get all of these set on a laser line so they're all nice and true. And yeah, I'll just use the laser as I'm nailing them off. So I'll show you some of the details that are elevating this job. One example is where I've sheeted behind this window. Now, 2 full sheets would not cover it. This is a 2.5 metre wide window. So I've divided it into 3 equal parts. So when I put the cover strips on the ply, they're going to be symmetrical with the window, and I've done the same up the top. So I'll carry that line the whole way through. Most of the time my ply is joining on a stud, but where it's not joining on a stud, I'm just putting some ply behind, or sometimes I'm putting a noggin in or some blocking, just because otherwise these don't always flush out. And I've had a few places where there's been a bit of a lip between the 2 sheets of ply, and what I can do in that case is put a screw directly between the 2 sheets of ply, and I found that will pull it together and flush it out. So when the cover strip goes on it, it's just going to sit flat against the ply. So on a job like this where there's a lot of expense put into the materials. I'm just taking a little bit of extra time so that when I trim it all out, I'm going to get a great result. I hope you like my tutorial on marine ply walls. It was quite fun doing these walls. I certainly learnt a lot, and I'm really pleased with how it's come out. I think taking a little bit of extra time and getting all my joints nice and tight has made the job much better than if I'd just been a bit rough. I've done a lot of gyprock in the past and billboard and every sort of lining you can imagine, and I think plywood is really a great lining material. It's got a lot of advantages over gyprock. For example, now it just needs a few coats of paint and some cover strips and it's all finished. Whereas with gyprock, you've got to do cornice, you've got to plaster, and then you've got to sand, and then you've got to paint. It's a lot of work after you install the sheets, whereas with the ply, it takes a little bit longer to install, but then it's basically finished. As you can see, I'm surrounded by kitchen cabinets, so I've been busy with this flat pack kitchen, and maybe that will be my next video. I'll have to wait and see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe.